So we are going to have kitty feet over here in the corner because my kitty Echo has decided to hang out with us here. I wish I could have kitty paws in every single video, but I cannot control this situation. But I thought in this video I would take a retrospective look at the decks that I've been working with, basically my early autumn deck list, because now we're shifting into the last half of autumn. I'm shifting away from some of the pairs that I had been using and onto other ones, so I thought it'd be fun to go over what I worked with and kind of how I worked with them. And I'm also going to try to, where I can, share, I guess, some spreads or a spread that I pulled from that pair and how I worked with it. I thought that might be a fun idea, or to get a feel for how I work with them. So the first pairing is kind of my early autumn cozy deck pair, and that is Oak, Ash, and Thorn. I have the mini, and I paired it with a Compendium of Witches, but the one half of a Compendium of Witches that is all items. I forget what they call it in the book, but this is all things, or I think they're called whispers in this deck. And I left the other half of the deck out just because I thought, well, first of all, let's look at them paired together, because visually these pair really nice together, I think. But also I wanted to get to know this deck one half at a time, because I've worked with it together. I've always kept the whispers and the voices separate, but I wanted to just really focus in on each half of the deck. And because I really liked how this pair looked together, it just felt like the way to do it. And so with these, they were not so much part of my deeper journaling practice. They were more so, not every day, but on days where I felt called to, kind of me tapping in for the day of who my teacher was, using a Compendium of Witches to pull for that, and then what the lesson was and the wisdom. I've talked about this spread before in, I think, my previous practice video for last winter, because it was a spread I worked with Persephone a lot. And I've taken that spread into other areas of practice too, because I just really like this spread. It works as a daily thing. It works as, here's a situation I'm dealing with, I want advice. It works, kind of as an all-rounder type of spread in many ways. So this was a pairing I really enjoyed. I kind of wish I had journaled with it more, because I was just letting this be a daily kind of pull. But again, I didn't do it every day. It was just when I felt like it. There were some days where this was all that I did. And other days where I pulled from it, and I guess I was finding it to be very divinatory, and I was looking for it to see how I felt about that. I had recorded a video probably more than a month ago that was about working with oracle decks as prompts, or ways to prompt yourself to come up with all sorts of questions that you can then use in your practice. And in that video, which I'll post maybe after this at some point, in that video, I was saying I didn't really do divinatory as like a primary part of my practice. Yes, I turn to the cards sometimes for divinatory reasons, but as a daily practice, I don't generally go for or seek or enjoy having a what's going to happen today type of message. But the way I was working with these and this particular spread of who's my teacher, what's my lesson, and what's the wisdom, it became more of just guidance for the day. And it wound up being kind of divinatory. So that was interesting. I don't know that I wouldn't do that all the time. I just kind of wanted to experiment with it, because after kind of recording that video and sitting with this idea of working that way, I was like, let me try it again, because I'm curious if I still feel the way that I think I do about it. And I kind of do, but this was also fun at the same time. I don't know. It's kind of a mix, but I am carrying on this practice in a slightly different way for the later part of autumn. But let me first share, let's see, I think I have 2 spreads just to show you how I worked with it. And this was one that was divinatory. So I had pulled teeth, which is kind of about having grit or having tooth to you, right? Having a bite. So that kind of energy teaching me about Nine of Wands on that particular day. So it was sort of like keeping up the fight was the message I was getting there. And my lesson is about enduring. And the wisdom, Five of Pentacles, was giving me this message of, okay, so like enduring and putting up a fight, having strong teeth on something that I'm sort of tired of dealing with, but I'm not giving up on. For the greater wisdom of Five of Pentacles, I wasn't sure how to make of that as the wisdom. But by the end of the day, it made sense to me because I wound up getting into a bit of a confrontational conversation or discussion where it felt like I was having to have my teeth and be defensive and hold the line, so to speak. And at the end of it, I felt very unsupported because of, the nature of who the conversation was with and blah, blah, blah. So I felt very like I didn't have support. Like I'm totally on my own on this. I don't have the resources around me of support in community, in material actuality. But the wisdom of this card, I think, is that there is support around you. It just might not look like what you expect it to be or what you wished it was. And I think that was my takeaway of this, is that there is support to be had, but I might have to look for it in different places than I've been looking for it, which lined up with that day. So that was one of them. And then another, I had pulled Autumn as my teacher, which is great for an early autumn practice. And the lesson was Four of Wands, wisdom was the Fool. So for me, autumn is teaching me about celebrating, about appreciating what I have to celebrate, I think was part of what I took away from this. And the greater wisdom of the Fool is the way I think of the Fool is also just being so present that the past and past experiences are not thwarting you, and so willing to move forward and be present that you are able to appreciate those moments where you do have the stability of community around you or moments around you that are celebratory of something. So that's how I worked with these two and work with the spread in general, whether it's these pair of decks or others. And I am carrying this on because since I worked with the first half of this deck, I wanted to work with the second half of it, which perfectly lines up with Heartwood. So same deck creators. I know most people on TarotTube have seen these decks, but just in case you haven't, look at this box though. Isn't this cool? It's like one of the most beautiful tuck boxes. But yeah, so this deck, Heartwood, is the same creators as Three Trees Tarot. And then I pulled in the other half of Compendium of Witches, which is all the voices, all the witches. So these paired together also work just so perfectly. It was just like kind of a meant to be situation. And I wanted to work with both Oak, Ash, and Thorn and Heartwood. But I do find Heartwood to be that darker, later half of autumn, just in the style of the atmosphere that's in the deck. But now, of course, we're having this archetype of a persona being the teacher, and then the lesson and the wisdom of that. So this is fun, because I'm like getting to know both facets of this deck and how it shifts, having the teacher be the representation of an item or an object or a thing or an animal or element or a season, versus having the comforter be my teacher for today. So the comforter is teaching me about tradition, is teaching me about carrying on tradition with the wisdom of the Fool, setting out on your own maybe, or as you move into the world on your own journey, finding comfort and being able to carry forward your tradition or whatever. You can dive into the readings however you want, but I've just really enjoyed these, and it does give me that later part of autumn feel, and I think they visually look really beautiful together. And Heartwood is just such a gorgeous deck. Like, this is one of my favorites. King of Pentacles. And also the Knight of Cups. Look how precious. I mean, it's not a Halloween deck, but of course a card like this makes you feel that Halloween Samhain energy. So this pair is the one I'm kind of shifting into, and one of the spreads I wanted to share. I mean, this is more current rather than retrospective of what I've been working with, but because they were tied in, and this was sort of a journey of working with these 3 decks in combination with each other. One of them was my teacher being the memory, and the lesson 8 of Swords, the wisdom, judgment. So memories teaching me about what it feels like or is to seemingly be trapped, having this victim mentality, if you will, or this idea that there's no ability for you to escape, which is a thought trap, because you have scissors to get out right here. Although I would argue this bunny doesn't have thumbs, so this is almost a mockery. But, you know, the notion is there. I get what the notion is meant to be, but I just thought that was funny. And then judgment being the wisdom is that this is your call to act on. And this is what you make of it. You know, with this mouse looking in the mirror, it's like taking into account how much have you contributed to this situation and what role do you play? And once you realize that, what are you going to do about it? So that's the deeper wisdom. So that's how I'm working with these. Very much the same thing. That spread is very malleable to whatever decks. Oh, and then I did, because this is my recent one that I liked, but the healer as my teacher, with 6 of Wands as my lesson, 7 of Pentacles as the wisdom. So the healer teaching me about what it is to find success, to succeed at being healed or healing oneself, and how much of that is a measure of the validation from others, as well as the validation that you give yourself. So the external evidence that you've succeeded at healing, and the lesson around that a healer might have. With the deeper wisdom of 7 of Pentacles, this whole spread kind of was speaking to me of healing and feeling like you're succeeding at it or getting somewhere with it, being victorious with it is something that requires a great deal of patience. And in that patience, there are times where you kind of have to wait it out and keep up the good work. But also you're waiting for things to dry. You've put in the effort, but it hasn't yielded anything quite yet, but it's a matter of time before it does, and kind of tempering that expectation with the wisdom of patience. So I really enjoy these, and I kind of do want to, because I haven't been journaling with these cards. I kind of really do, but I've been working on, now I'm going to get into the maybe deeper things, because these have been general pulls where I'm just open-endedly saying like, okay, who is my teacher today? What's the lesson and what's the wisdom? And that could totally be a journaling practice, but I've also had a lot of stuff on my mind lately that I've kind of been working through. So kind of stepping back a bit, one of the earlier pairs I was working with involved these blue bones and Death Doula. I think I've shown them together, but let me grab Death Doula because I don't have it right here. So these two together pair beautifully. Death Doula for me is one that I'm typically working with through grief, although I may start to explore kind of tangents off of grief. I'm reading a really good book about grief at the moment. I don't know if I'll talk about that in this video or maybe the next. But Blue Bones is not specifically a grief deck for me, but it is a melancholy, a up-in-your-feels type of deck. It is nostalgic. It is it's honest, and it makes you look at what you're feeling in a way that I find unique. It's also something I really wanted to say about it, and if I do make a video in depth about my work with this deck, which I've been debating how I want to do it because I don't want to get overly personal on such a public platform. But if I do, the main thing I wanted to talk about was how this is really a deck of catharsis and what role catharsis can play in personal practice, how it's been considered in psychology, and where the start and the end of it is in terms of there are times where catharsis is productive and other times where it's like, maybe not. But with this, I have found a lot of solace, a lot of catharsis. I started working with this because it had arrived around the time that our dog tragically passed. This is her, Chloe. So, that was rough. She was 3 years old. So way too young, and it was an awful situation that should have never happened and involved the negligence of others. And so there was just a huge element of tragedy and all these really mixed emotions of grief between anger and sorrow and, all the things. And I found working with this deck really helpful. There was also a couple others that I worked with in the immediate throes of it, but this was sort of the lingering catharsis. And I did a spread on what tragedy is, or like kind of untangling the idea of tragedy with this deck by itself. That was just shifted something in me. So anyway, this was a pair I worked with because Death Doula, like I said, is one that I turn to for grief. And generally speaking, it's sort of a medicine deck for me. That's usually what I'm pulling it for, is like, what is the medicine? But I also just kind of let it be informing how I was thinking about what was coming up through these blue bones. So that was sort of early. That was honestly also end of summer that I was working with these ones, but I wanted to kind of share the trajectory of working with this because then moving into autumn, I had shifted into a different direction. And I wasn't really looking for this as much as a catharsis deck, but I wanted to shift out of the catharsis and start walking somewhere. And perfectly, the long way home arrived. Now, early on with this, I was working with it by itself just to get a feel for it, which I really enjoyed, but I have also pulled these blue bones into it. So they dance together sometimes, not every time I work with either or, but I really enjoyed this as a pairing. And where this one is the catharsis, like really sink your teeth into what is being felt type situation, this is like the rope that you're holding on to and blindly trying to find your way back to yourself type energy. That's what I would say with the long way home. It really gives that feeling of, in the pulls that I've had with it over the few weeks in a row I was working with it, it really gives that sense of like a rope to pull on that you can feel like you're getting a little bit closer to home. So where this would be kind of, I don't want to say it's catharsis always, because like cards like this coming up, there's something nostalgic and emotive about what this kind of card makes you feel. And it's like raw, honest kind of emotive. And this is like facing something that helps you move. I don't know, probably not wording that as best I could, but I've really enjoyed working with these. And so these, while they aren't autumnal exactly in the aesthetic, they are in the letting go, in the moving on, in the shedding, in the accepting and honoring, and all of that kind of emotion. And I think I talked a little bit about this maybe in a different video, and how this deck really had me like needing to watch the movie Butterfly Effect, which was so on point for what I was feeling at the time with the loss of our dog. And I hadn't watched it in so long that I had really forgotten a lot of the premise. I understood it was about how actions in the past change and like how little things affect big things type stuff, and how much it can affect from a seemingly small change or whatever, right? That's the whole idea of butterfly effect. A butterfly moves its wings and a hurricane's on the other side of the earth type stuff. Genesis. And watching that movie, like, this deck is always going to make me think of that, because his whole journey is like trying to make things right, but the more right he tries to make it, and some of it is for his own selfish, what he wants to have be right, but the more he tries to do that, the more messed up it all gets, really, and in ways that you couldn't have anticipated. And there's something about that I did find cathartic in what I was feeling, given that I was going through that period of complicated grief around what happened to our dog, because it was just like all these things where I was like, man, if this had just been different, or that had just been different, or the timing just had to work out in such a profoundly perfect, awful way, all the way back from the very beginning. Like, when you realize what happened and can trace it all back to where it all started, it was just like the grand disaster. And it really had that feeling of butterfly effect, and this idea of like, if this butterfly just hadn't flapped its damn wings, but you try to change one little thing thinking it will fix everything, or it could have fixed everything, and some other sort of disaster could have happened. And I don't know, something about being drawn to that idea was cathartic to me. At the same time, with what happened to our dog, it was kind of like, at the same time, it's like, really, if certain things had been done differently, I don't see how something wrong could have come from it. It just would have meant that she could have not died. But I don't know. It was an interesting, at the time, very cathartic thing. Helped me get through the emotion of that. So, love these two decks. I need to tack this down, because I want to keep the little mirror right there like that. But I keep forgetting to. I have the tape I would use right here, but I'm still not going to do it right now. I don't know why. So those were decks I was kind of dappling into, in and out of autumn. The next set of decks is more deity work, because I felt really disconnected with that sort of practice. And I felt called to work again with Artemis, because I needed some of her kick-ass type energy, to be honest. So the deck I pulled out as an oracle was new to me, because Dream Song is one I picked up end of summer at a local shop, and I hadn't really worked with it. I had pulled an interview spread with it that by the time, like 2 months later, it's autumn now, I pulled it out and I was like, man, I really want to work with that with Artemis and around this particular issue. And I realized after I started working with it, looking back at that interview spread, that it was very much in line with what made me pull it out, and I hadn't consciously thought about it. So that was kind of interesting and fun to look back at that. That's why it's good to keep a record. I didn't even write about the interview spread. I just took a picture and printed it out so that I had it. So these as a pair were really great. I typically, with Tarot of the Huntress, oh, look at that, would work with it with the Witch Oracle, this is a US Games deck, I think. Yes? No? Who made this? Yep, US Games, and same with the Witch Oracle. But there was something about this and certain workings that I was doing at the time where Dream Song felt like the right energy. And also for autumn, Witch Oracle also is beautiful in autumn, but this one just was really giving me that early autumn vibes, I guess, and really worked for me. But yeah, it was good to connect back in with Artemis. It had been a while. I've been working with Persephone, then I was working with Hades, then Persephone, and then kind of finding my way back to Artemis, because she is the... If I were to say I had a patron deity, it would be her. And it was necessary to reconnect, because I really got, just between everything this year, I mean, personal stuff, but then everything that's going on in the world, I just kind of was in a place of feeling like, what the F, man? Like, I don't even know. So I needed the kind of kick-ass energy for a bit there. Let me see if I do have or can pull out a spread and speak to it. I didn't like prep and pull it aside ahead of time. So, 1 second. Okay, so one that I'll pull out, and I did the same spread that I was talking about with the first couple decks, where this was the teacher from Dream Song, and then the lesson and wisdom. So the way I worked with the spread was I had an actual prompt because of what I was feeling, and I was turning to get advice. And the question was, how do I give myself hope in what seems like hopeless times? So I wanted to share it in case it also helps someone else. But to give yourself hope in hopeless times, the teacher is grow your wishes. And from the book, I had written down what it said that spoke to me, which is a moment to shamelessly nurture your wishes. Don't alter them for the comfort of others. Don't prune them to fit a life you feel you're supposed to live. Your wishes don't make sense to anyone but you. Let yourself feel the enthusiasm and let the enthusiasm infuse. Enthusiasm literally means to be filled with the Spirit of God. So I wasn't sure what to make of that at first, because I was like, man, grow my wishes. But this hopeless times thing feels a whole lot bigger than that. It's like, sure, there's many things we all wish for to be different, but what the heck do you do with that, right? But the lesson above, Six of Fire, the way I see this card in this deck in particular, this is to stand in your own validation, regardless of whether others are seeing and validating that for you or not, because in this image we have just her claiming her own victory. So, with the 5 coming before this, 5 of Fire, it's also enduring conflict and believing in that resolution more than the conflict would have you believe in defeat. And grow your wishes, as the teacher to me was saying, you have to think from that perspective of growth, of cultivating that mindset, of cultivating that energy and doing the things, believing that it's worth doing them. And the lesson of real victory not being about conforming, but standing tall, being authentic, and believing in your own vision enough to validate it for yourself and to pursue it for yourself. And the greater wisdom with Queen of Wands, which is a card, it's interesting because to associate it with Artemis, that you could see facets of her in all the queens, but with Artemis, for me, the specific dimension of it is that self-assured, bold, confident, and unafraid to speak what inspires her, or what is honest about how she sees things. And so that greater wisdom of being magnetic, unapologetic, and having charisma but that comes from being completely authentic, regardless, again, of what others see or think, and to believe in having that self-belief and self-assurance to focus on and prioritize and truly believe in the success of what you think is a better vision for the world. And something that came through as a message to me, somewhat separate, but in conjunction with this reading, was the idea of, this whole spread is about empowering your wishes and your visions for the world, and not caring if the people around you don't believe in it, or there are people in general that don't believe in it and whatever. Or not caring, but not giving that the pedestal. But a message that kind of came through in a meditation for me that I realized was connected to this is that small doesn't mean insignificant. Some of the most significant things in the universe are smaller than you can imagine them to be. And that's sort of what struck me, I think, all together with all of this. And it was a message that I needed, that helped. And, it doesn't answer or change all of the great things that need changing. I guess I also needed this in a more personal life kind of sense to hear this sort of message, but it could apply on a bigger scale too. And regardless, if it resonates for you, take it if there's something in it that feels resonant. But these decks in general, as a pairing, I just really enjoyed. Visually, I think they work beautifully together. The way that they work together in messages works beautifully together. Tarot of the Huntress is a deck that I work with at any point in the year. And so by extension, I guess this one would be too, but there's so many cards in this Dream Song Oracle that feel like so beautifully autumn to me. Whereas like just the color palette and like this one, Learn from the Bees. It's beautiful. I quite like the book. It's not my favorite Angie Sullins, but I do still like it a lot. Yeah. Oh, Have Tea with the Birds was one that I pulled at one point too. That was an interesting reading. Craft Your Focus. So it's a pairing that I truly enjoyed, and I haven't worked with it the last couple weeks. It was more early part of autumn where where did I have that one card? But yeah, it was a pairing that I really enjoyed working with. Gave me that autumn aesthetic, if you will, made me feel like I was sinking into the season, and gave me a chance to get to know this deck, reconnect with working with Artemis, all the things. And that's the main thing I find with working with Artemis is it's usually like a pep talk, and that was the sort of energy I really kind of was seeking at the time. Real quick, the other pairing that I did use with this, speaking of the video that I may be posting after this one, so I think I just have to tweak an editing situation with it or something like that, and it's good to go. But that would be the Tree Whisper Oracle. This was the deck I used in the video I made about working with an Oracle deck to come up with to come up with prompts, and how you can use an Oracle deck to come up with prompts. Because this is just such a straightforward, single keyword type of deck, but I also shared other decks that are great for this. But I have all three of the Tree Whisperer Oracles, and I love them as seasonal decks because there is this original, which is autumn, there's the winter, and then there's the more spring-summer type editions. And pairing it with this deck is usually my go-to because we're in the woods, and we're talking about Artemis here, so that makes sense. But this is sort of an interesting deck to meditate with, and I don't know that it's really path work with the image, but to find the visual that strikes your eye first, because you can see all kinds of figures and things in these mirrored tree images. And it's very interesting. Or even like the mirroring of how this looks like a triangular kind of opening into these trees, and then you have this here, story, 5 of air. What's the story of what brought things to this point? Like, interesting place to go with a reading. So that was the other pair that I used with this. I wanted to shout out that deck, or this deck, because it's just, I love them. I love the backs also, to see how they look like together. That's the wrong card. It's just pretty satisfying, all of these together. I enjoy that. I try to enjoy the little things where I can. So that was Tree Whisper Oracle, Dream Song Oracle, and Tarot of the Huntress. That was my other set of decks that I really enjoyed early autumn. I might still dip into these. The next set of decks was Witch Sister, and Sacred Rebels, which I can't really fit the boxes into screen. So Sacred Rebels is one of my all-time favorite Oracle decks. for a variety of reasons. And then Witch Sister, I've had for a hot minute. And I started pulling it out early autumn just to kind of pull cards here and there. I had it on a particular altar that was was like a fierce energy altar, let's call it that. And it felt like the right type of deck for that. And then it just sort of naturally paired with Sacred Rebels for me because they have that similar energy of, I guess, being very empowering. Now, what I did for a while with these was pull a card from Sacred Rebels. And because these cards can have like a really deeper, longer guidebook type of situation to them, it would sort of be the card of the week. And then periodically, if I felt called to that altar and to pull from Witch Sisters, I would pull a couple cards to see like where I was at with what was the message of this card. And I was sort of doing that just to experiment, to keep it loose, to keep it unstructured. This was not a pairing that I journaled with much at first. I just was trying to get a feel, particularly for Witch Sisters. And because I've worked with Sacred Rebels a fair bit, it was like an anchor point, and I could sit with that being like the focus of a given time period, whenever. It wasn't even like necessarily every single week. It's just like when it felt right to keep the card and when it felt right to change the card and pull a new one. But these two work really interestingly and beautifully together. Witch Sister and I think I will have to do a more intentional, disciplined workshop with it. And I've started to put together an idea of how I might want to do that. I'm not sure if I'll do it this autumn or just kind of have it prepped for next autumn. But I kind of want to explore it in a spiral manner. It doesn't feel like one I want to approach in like a typical manner because it's just not a typical deck. So, and just getting to know the cards individually. But what I've started to do now is work with it more in a journaling practice where I'm more deeply connecting with the cards and trying to understand how the messages come through for me. Because at first it was just kind of like when I needed the energy and when I wanted to feel out this deck, but I knew I wasn't going as deep into the message as there was potential to go into, because I'm still kind of wrapping my head around how this deck works. Sometimes the guidebook is like so clear for me, and then other times I'm kind of wishing there was more, or I'm like uncertain what the message is in the context of a tarot system. And if anyone has any advice or insight working with Witch Sisters, I'm all ears. I would love to hear how other people have approached it, or what kind of doorway into it has been most meaningful or connecting for you to kind of get a tap into the deck. Because yeah, I love it, but I still feel like there's a lot to go in terms of feeling like I could pull a couple of cards and on a more intuitive, familiar level, connect in with what the message is. But maybe part of it is I'm like trying really hard to intentionally get to know it through the book. And I might have to start exploring it from the standpoint of like, okay, what do I feel or see about this card in relation to what the author is mentioning of the story? Because in the book you have kind of the story and then the divinatory meaning. And sometimes I might pull something different out of this story and how I associate it to like the Three of Waters than the divinatory meaning might necessarily. I don't know. It's a really good guidebook, but sometimes I feel like I'm not quite grasping, I think, is the issue. But maybe it's just because I haven't been doing a more intentional journaling practice, because I think part of that process of really writing down the reading and writing out what comes through solidifies it. I really had these two out for like a few months since the end of summer, honestly, because I started to feel the shift. And like I said, it was on an altar that was for fierceness, let's say. And I just wasn't working with it as deep because I wasn't journaling with it maybe, but maybe that's the issue. We'll see, because I did just start doing that. And so because of that, I think I have all of the one spread I did that I can pull out. But I had pulled Diving for Light. And really, I just worked with this in the sense of, I don't think I asked a particular thing. I just was thinking through where I was at. And that's a lot of times what I do with Sacred Rebels, because it just tends to give me the card that says everything I need to hear, both in terms of like the keywords on the card, but then going into the guidebook. Like I know Alana can write really intense guidebooks in terms of like the wordiness and length of the entries. I really love the Sacred Rebels one. I think it says, it always has me wanting to copy into my journal like huge portions of the text because of how specifically it resonates with whatever I'm feeling. And for this, it was Diving for Light, and I pulled above and below, just kind of more generally, like what's above this Diving for Light and what's underneath it, which in the context of this card is kind of like, what is the light that's being dove into for? And the guidebook for this was talking about being seduced by the dark thoughts that pull you into the darkness or trap you in there, or the voices that limit you and blah, blah, blah. So having the Lord of the Forest, who can be kind of seductive and tempting, not necessarily all bad, but just luring, was an interesting pull for it to be above it, like the source of the darkness, if you will. And then the King of Trees, and this message of certainty in oneself to lead a vision forward and to be, there was a phrase actually in the book that I really liked, I think along the lines of having a very firm sense and belief in one's belonging and confidence to lead from that, like not at all feeling like you don't belong. Like everywhere the King of Trees, the stag, goes, their presence takes ownership and is like, yeah, I have a right to be here. And if there's an issue, here's what we're going to do about it, and we're not going to stop. You know, so this was the first spread that I journaled with these, and I really liked that. And I think diving more deeply into using these for a journaling practice works really well. And you know, again, like this, I could see as a deck that I'd work with throughout the year, and Sacred Rebels absolutely. But there's something about this that feels like the energy of the deck that feels end of summer, shifting into autumn to me. You know, it's got a lot of that nature and natural colors and muted tones, and the cards that are a little more heavy are like just have a richness to them, a depth, or even this card, like the tradition has that very ancestral quality, and this whole deck does. One thing, if anyone has books they would recommend that would go along with this kind of Celtic inspired type deck that, you know, does a good job of sinking teeth into understanding the associations, because like I can go searching whenever I want to go deeper into a story, but if there's a book, I don't want to bring in too many books, so it has to be one. Whatever the one top book is. If anyone has a recommendation, I'm all ears, but I don't want to bring in a ton of books. I need to really not do that. I have so many I need to read. But yeah, Witch Sisters, really loving it. I do think I will at some point do a deeper deck study with it. But for now, that's how I'm approaching it, is to just take the cards as they come. I've gotten a little familiar, and now I'm moving into a deeper practice. Okay, so this next pair was one that I totally pulled out when the air started to shift and when it started to feel like autumn was coming. I think probably must have been around Mabon, I guess. And that is the Obsidian Oracle by Megan. I don't want to mispronounce that. I should know how to pronounce that, but I'll put the link, okay? I'll put the link for sure for all the indie decks, mass market decks, I feel like are easy to find. So, but Hush Tarot and Obsidian, this is a pairing that I loved last year. I think pretty sure that's when I got Hush Tarot, was last year. And did I shuffle those cards back in? I guess so. But if there were a deck that really on its own quintessentially gave me autumn energy, it's Hush Tarot. So I was really excited and looking forward to pulling this one out. I had my first experiences with it last year, and this was one of the cards that came out in the interview spread, and that wound up being such a profound interview spread that unraveled like beyond an interview spread and into a much deeper unfolding of the events in the following week. And that I was kind of blown away with this deck. And it is one that you kind of have to study, that you have to build your own understanding of each of the cards. And this was like another card that came through. And I have just found, as I've worked with it, the personal notions that are like this King of Pentacles, for example, and this wise and sort of Saturnian owl grabbing the cuckoo and being just because of how it came up in the interview spread and how things played out. It was very much giving the message of, you need to focus on what's practically important and take action in that way, strategically, logically. This is not about emotionality. This is purely about getting it done. And that kind of aggressive energy in a King of Pentacles was interesting, but this was very much a focus on what's practically important right now and what needs to be done type of energy. And so when this card comes up, like at first, flip through the deck, you're kind of like, King of Pentacles, what is this? But this idea of grabbing onto time and being like, hey, this is one of your material resources, use it wisely, be intentional about how you're using it, was that's kind of the way that I feel this deck has to have a relationship built with it, at least for me, is to very much experience the card and the unique perspective of the card. Because looking through the deck, it can feel kind of like, what is this? Like, what does this have to do with King of Swords? What does this have to do with Eight of Cups? But this was another one that came up in that reading, and I think it was the card for how the deck saw me, and I didn't really understand it in the moment because it was seeing me in real time but ahead of time, because this idea, again, because the owl was a reiterating image. Where did it go? That whole spread, like maybe someday I'll talk about it, but it's kind of hard to navigate how to talk about these things and personal story without it being too much. But with these two cards, and this being, I think, what the deck asked of me, and then this being how the deck saw me, when I first was looking at this reading as an interview, I was like, what? I don't really understand. Like, you're asking of me to be very focused on what I need to get done, and you're seeing me as someone who is left. Like, this is Eight of Cups, but like looking back, like this is like kind of, it's not that usual initial moment in the Eight of Cups where you have just decided to leave something behind. It's when you've gotten already some distance from it and are looking back at like, yeah, we left that. We moved on. And now we're taking a moment to look back at it, to acknowledge it, but we're not going back there, kind of thing. And with the King of Pentacles and the owl being like the guardian here, it just panned out. I don't know, panned out in such a way that I was really blown away. And that's like the least of the things that blew me away about that reading. So this deck is intense. And I think the card I got for how it described itself was the Moon. And that's how I would describe it. It is one that you have to see beyond what your surface impression is. There's more going on than your initial impression, and you have to look closely in the shadows, and it speaks to things that are in the shadows or that are coming around the corner, and your hesitancy to acknowledge it or to really take a look at it is causing the resistance. Is sort of, I don't know. That's what came through for me. Everyone's going to have their own experience with any given deck, but that's what came through for me. And I really love this one. I love getting to know it. It's fascinating. It's sometimes frustrating. Like even this, which initially looking at the image, I would think Ace of Cups is the Nine of Cups. But at the same time, it's like, okay, it's an overflowing cup. There's a snake there. There's that sense of being flowing with pleasure, or filled with the pleasure of your wish, you could say, or having things as you want them emotionally, being full, even if there's broken parts, you've managed to fill it with other things that please you. I don't know, you can just lean into the imagery in interesting ways and be open to it. The guidebook is short and brief, but somehow it still manages to be pretty helpful. But I can see why some people will take this deck and restructure it. And for example, with that 9 of Cups, I'm sure there's got to be somebody who's switched it to the Ace of Cups, because visually I can see it looks like that, right? And you kind of have to contort a little bit, or twist a little bit, or shift perspective a little bit to make it resonate with the general message of that archetype. But I love working with it with Obsidian Oracle. I just like how they pair together. And Obsidian is the type where it has, these elements on the card, and other than the moon phases, you have to have your own associations. And some of them I do and some of them I don't. But one of the things that I just really love is this little guidebook, because the messages in it. So the first portion will describe what each symbol, like what the crane and what sage kind of tend to mean symbolically. And the bottom part is kind of the message. And I've always found the message to be so resonant in such a beautiful way that I very much enjoy this Oracle deck, even though it requires most of the time going into the book, because it's not the kind of Oracle that has, key phrase or keyword. I really love it. I love the production of it. I love the artwork. I love the messages. And over time, I build my association of what it means, these 2 symbols. And I'm learning either an animal or a plant and a crystal. And I really like that, because these are things that I like to build associations with. So yeah, they really, they resonate together. I love both of them together. This is such a beautiful deck. It's got the black glossy edges and these beautiful backs. And I like the way they look together, the whole 9 yards. I like the experience of these. But what I was rambling so much about the interview spread from last year that I didn't say I had done another sort of spread this year just to see like what to work with this deck on, and I had gotten the Tower. And so I had come up and gathered a bunch of prompts around the Tower. So working with this deck was usually pulling one of those prompts and pulling cards from this, and I would usually do my above and below with Obsidian in the middle as a bridge card, is how I would tend to think of it. So I'd ask whatever question about what it is that needs to come or needs to be teared down or whatever. I'd come up with had a whole bunch of prompts on a piece of paper that I would just either go in order or pull from the question that drew me in that day. And I would see above and below and then pull this as like the bridge. How do I get there? What is the guidance or whatever you might want to think of it? I just let it be what it is. So I think, early on in practice, answering one question, I really didn't want more than one card because it felt like too much. It's overwhelming. But I very much like having multiple cards because I use them as context of position. So there's the question that I'm asking, and then there's what's above that, what's below that, what's between that. So I can work the reading that way and also pair my decks, but it gives me a more rounded answer a lot of times. So that's how I worked with this. I don't have a particular spread pulled out for this one, and because of the nature of it, it's kind of like on the more personal side. I'd have to dig through my journal and see if there's one that I would share, but I'm not going to for this video because we're getting pretty long per usual. Always talking too much. Hopefully you guys don't mind. That was Hush Tarot and Obsidian. And I think when it comes to pairs, like those are all the pairs and all the ways I worked with them. But I did have two other decks that I brought in that were new that I kind of kept around as just, I don't know, general readers when I wanted to mess around or pull a random spread. Or this one, Darkwood in particular, I was mostly using just to, how to say, to play around with spreads or readings for others and just getting to know it because it's a new deck. It's very RWS functional. What do you say? I guess it's not a clone. It's not an RWS clone, but it's very aligned with RWS, so easy to read with. But I did want to do, and I did start to do a couple of like pulling a card and just noting down my personal associations with it or what came up for me, because I wanted to get to know it really deeply. Like Four of Cups, yes, this is very, in a sense, a traditional representation, but it's also a twist on a traditional representation because you have these foxes, you have the very more nuanced thing of another fox is trying to bring something to please this one, but this one's just disinterested and is not really having it, not really seeing it, not really appreciating it or whatever. So I really liked the idea of going through and getting to know this a little more individually, card by card. I think I did do one or two larger spreads with this, and I'll probably continue to have it as like a deck that's in rotation. I didn't really pair it with anything. Actually, if anyone knows like great pairings for this deck, let me know. But I love it. I love this deck. I waited so long and like held off so long on getting it for whatever reason, but it's definitely one I really enjoy for this time of year. I've loved reading with. I'm really happy with the edging I did on it. I think I mentioned this in like the last video I uploaded, and it's like a chalky black, so it's not, it works with the backs because this design seems like a chalky or coal black to me and not like a jet black. Anyway, going off point here. But this Queen of Wands, for example, like, hello. One of my favorite Queen of Wands. Darkwood, that was in rotation. Let me actually not lose the cards I had out. So I was doing a thing. Also do quite like the guidebook. And then the last deck that I will show for this portion. The Silver Acorn. So this was my other autumn pick. I put off getting this last year, and then I regretted it, but I saw that she had the second edition out, and I scooped it up. I probably would prefer, like, the second edition, the difference, I think, is just that these card backs and this particular line work are gray, and same on the box within this border thing. But other than that, it's the same. And the first edition had more of a purple. I'd probably prefer the purple just because I liked how that looked, but I don't mind the gray. So I'm just really happy to have a copy of this because I love the backs. It's on a linen cardstock, and it is the cute autumn Samhain Halloween deck. It brings me those feels of Halloween as a kid. But like the joyful, the slightly spooky, but like fun type of situation. So I don't have a lot of decks that really fit the category of inner child or cute or cozy. But this is a lovely, soft type of reader for this time of year. And I mean soft in artwork. I haven't worked with it a lot. I've played around with it. I've done some kind of like mock spreads. I've read a couple times for others, but for personal, I haven't quite read with it. I wouldn't say it reads pretty, just like, how to say, true. Hasn't been sassy. It hasn't been super soft about the messages either. It's kind of like in the middle when it comes to that, is what I have found. But the imagery is just so, like, this artwork, I'm in love. I just really enjoy the world that's created in this deck. And yeah, it's one of those decks that I'm like keeping out as you just want a tarot deck that's going to read straightforward, where Hush is one that you kind of have to really open your mind and think about. This one is a straightforward reader. It's got a sweetness in the artwork, but it fits this time of year. Really cute autumn Halloween type deck. So yeah, very happy I finally have a copy of this and that I scooped one up. Because I just love this. I'm like showing the whole deck because it's just so cute. It's so cute. It's so precious. I love it. I love the shuffle of it. It's one of those decks that I enjoy just kind of having out and shuffling. And yeah, it's a little larger. I can still comfortably overhand. Or, no, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I can still overhand. So, works for me. I like the kind of different elongated shape of it. It's kind of fun. So those kind of wrap up my early and sort of into later autumn decks, kind of covers what my practice has been. That was actually a lot of pairings of decks, but I sort of began, that kind of covers September, October, and all the decks I've been working with that I've been keeping out. And yeah, who knows? We'll see what kind of video I do next, but I was sort of thinking it would be fun to just look at the decks I'm pulling out for the darker times in the later half of autumn. We are just here by me reaching the point where the trees are finally losing their leaves. It's certainly quite late in the year for that kind of stuff to finally be happening. But it's just been a slow descent into autumn as far as foliage and all of that goes. And yeah, okay, handful of decks all on the table. I think we'll wrap it up here. I hope you're doing well and that you've been having a relatively good autumn and hanging in there. At any rate, have a lovely day, evening, or whatever it is by you, and I'll catch you in the next one.